The fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labour and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord thy God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigners residing in thy towns. So the important thing here is that the rule applies across the board. It doesn't matter whether you're foreign, it doesn't matter whether you're a beast or a person, it applies totally, because if God's going to rest on the seventh day, you're damn sure that you're going to be resting on the seventh day. And the good thing that Dennis Prager highlights when he reads through this is that it's the connection with the first commandment, in a sense, because without God you are a slave. It's God that brings the Israelites out from under the dominion of Pharaoh and his oppression and frees them so that they can then build Israel and their own society. And then likewise we see, in a sense, a second movement, or a different manifestation of the same idea, in that in Britain it was many Quakers and Christians who were against slavery. So William Wilberforce, Granville Sharp. There are many famous names in the effort to overcome slavery. Most importantly, the judicial ruling in the Somerset case, so where Lord Mansfield basically threw out the idea that slavery was, the natural state of things, that it could only be introduced by positive law, so from the human mind, and then implemented in order for, so that people could exploit other peoples for their labour. So Mansfield rejects it. Now, the important thing to remember, of course, when we've looked at the past three commandments and the Marxist iteration of them, is that we have this Gnostic aspect, which is the false reality, coming to the revelation of the false reality, and then taking the revolutionary Promethean action to burn away the false detritus and dead wood, and to try and realize this divine spark within. And of course we then also have the material aspect and the materialization of Hegel's system. So we have the coming to awareness of divinity through consciousness, so and holding God as a constructed category within human consciousness. And then obviously our experience of coming to realization of this and orienting society towards this goal in the absolute. So that's Hegel. And then you have Marx's materialization of a substantial component of Hegel's system, whilst combining it with Rousseau. And so you collapse this absolute down into the material world. You likewise collapse the distinction between monarchy and and the people. But you've got the Rousseauist aspect, so you've got collective monarchy, which is what communism is. Now, when it comes to overturning reality because of falsehood, the Gnosticism, so on and so forth, you then, in the Marxist tradition, have something essentially to the effect that, remember that 6 days were laboured to bind you in deceit. The Sabbath sustains this alienation. For 6 and 1 days the wheel of generation must be set in motion by revolutionary practice. All thought, utterance, and action are subordinated to realising the revolution. So recall in Marx's system that theory is when you've got this reflection of reality in your consciousness. Now, the point is that it needs to be critiqued. So you engage in the process of critique, you find all the weaknesses, or you separate things out to find the antithesis. Remember, in the last video we heard about how you need to divide society deliberately as part of instigating the process of educating people into the correct view of reality, and then undertaking revolutionary practice. So you separate off a small group who have their own unique knowledge or way of understanding the world, and then you teach them that they've got to alter not only themselves, but come to a true manifestation, true realization of their inner divine essence, their divine spark realized in the material world. Now, when you come to the active part of that, you've got the theory, which is the reflection of your relation to the material world and a reflection of all the social relations. You then need to dialectically reform this in line, which Marx does, he establishes his own system. If you're someone who's coming to hear that, you are supposed to reflect Marx's system into your consciousness and then have that basically pushed back down through you and out to reform your material action. So you change your material relation with the world, you change your material relation with the people around you, or the social relation with people around you. So these two things together, theory and practice, are called praxis. So there's a movement where you've got the revelation in your consciousness and then you're implementing it. You've got the revelation and then that leads to a whole new set of conditions. It reveals more detritus, more false reality, and then new actions need to be generated in order to overcome this. Then they're put into practice, and then the entire process just continually repeats itself. Now, this is all subordinated to realizing the revolution, so that's taken as a predetermined good, as a predetermined goal, and action is only moral, obviously, when you're partaking in this. This is why you hear this concept of solidarity, which you often get in the Marxist tradition. So solidarity, essentially referencing the reflection of material relations. So if you could imagine that you are standing beside another person, you are you've got a material aspect to you, your body, your flesh, your matter, and there is the world around you, and then there are other people. So there is a material relationship between you and the world, and there's likewise a relationship between you and other people. Now, each of these can be reformed, and obviously once you come into social contract after the revelation and everything like this with other Marxists, you establish the horizontal social contract between you, so that's solidarity between the collective. But importantly, you also need to have solidarity in your consciousness. So the material relations, the social relations with others are reflected up into your consciousness, and it's important that these also reflect one another. So there needs to be solidarity in the reflection between your consciousness and someone else's consciousness. Likewise, because of praxis, this idea, these theories in your consciousness then need to be put into place, put into practice. So this means that there needs to be complete reflection in terms of the way that people conduct themselves. There needs to be solidarity in action. So you've got solidarity across the individual members of the collective, they've got solidarity in theory, and then they've got solidarity in praxis. So they're all working in lockstep with one another. Now, when we come to overturning the world as it is, inverting all of our understanding of it so that people opt into the new form of reality, the new forms of knowledge and culture, religion, conception of human nature and morality that all go along with it, what's deemed beautiful and what's no longer deemed beautiful, then you're going to have to forcibly overcome it. And for this, Marx states that man must prove the truth, i.e. the reality and power, the this worldliness of his thinking in practice. That's essentially just what we've done. You've got to overcome the people who are not thinking the same as you, who are not reflecting the material world in the same way as you. So all social life is essentially practical, and that's because it's the world, all of the material relations, essentially in this movement, reforming itself, people reforming the world reforming them, reforming their consciousness, leading to new theories. These are put into practice, so on and so forth. Of course, it's very clear that you need to work all the time in order to overcome this false reality. That's why you have to have an alternative conception for everything, an alternative theory, and then an alternative practice. So if existing society says that, it's, or if in the Bible, for example, the material world is handed over to Adam and Eve, well, private property is ultimately instituted by God. So that's one of the connections between Genesis and the Marxist system inverting it is, you get to undo God's injunction that there is private property, and you also get to undo the social manifestation of that, whether it's by a secular path or not. So the idea is that the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. And of course, you can't change it if you've got the wrong form of consciousness, if you've got the wrong form of logic, and the problem with the existing society being held in deceit like it is that A, people haven't had this realization. B, they haven't, if they have had the realization, been working against it. And then C, the implication is for the people who are going to change society, they're going to need to work harder than the people and all of the combined efforts of the old society. So there's not really any rest. You've got to work fully for the revolution. And if you look at any of the testimonies of people who have spent some serious time as revolutionaries or who've joined the Communist Party, Bella Dodd is an excellent case in point. Essentially, the way that you enter in, you're obviously naive, you want to do some good in the world, but the problem is that you're steadily, it's voluntary, so you get given some tasks, and you do these tasks and you do something which is perhaps useful to the party, to the advancement of the revolutionary cause, and then steadily, if you're still engaged, you continue to do this, but then slowly more and more tasks are put on you. And Dodd describes this interesting process of where, your old identity is in a sense displaced as you steadily adopt this new Marxist communist identity. And one of the significant means of affecting that to take place is by having people always be stewing in the revolutionary dogma, the apocrypha, as if you're going to have the intellectual discussion within this sphere, you need to understand the logic, the methodology, the existing theories, the injunction to always put it into practice. You're going to need to read people like Marx, Engels, Lenin, so you're always steeping yourself and stewing in these revolutionary juices. And it's only, a significant part down the line that you realize that, you've spent your entire time studying this. You're always doing tasks for the communist group. It could be someone like Antifa nowadays. That might be, one of those fringe organizations where you kind of think that you're fighting anti-fascists. But ironically, if you're unaware of their history, then the anti-fascists were established against the fascists. But one of the things that is poorly taught, in at least when I went through school, was a key point wasn't emphasized, that being the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, where the Nazis under Hitler and the Soviets under Stalin made an alliance and jointly invaded Poland, starting the Second World War. So it's always important to remember that dialectical materialism and Nazism led to the start of the Second World War. But because typically we recall that the Soviets were fighting against the Nazis, we think of them as being on our side, and I think this has obviously given people a bit of trouble in dealing with some of the ideas around, the true nature of Marxism. It gets a bit of a free pass in a sense, because the Soviets were eventually betrayed and fought against the Nazis. But anyway, that's a bit of a side point. The trick is that everything needs to be reformed, and so when Dodd was going through this process, steadily more and more tasks heaped upon her, there's always this thin end of the dialectical wedge, and then you've got someone higher up who's got more knowledge because they're higher in the clergy, and they're always tapping on that wedge with a hammer to try and split you off from the old society through this process of educating, through the process of giving you revolutionary tasks, which get you to further reflect the socialist consciousness and revolutionary action, which is, in the next historical epoch, and then to implement that in the present day. So you're always reforming your consciousness. You're always going through this revelation. It's essentially the model of what happens in gangs and what happens in cults. So you are slowly separated off from your existing communities, the people who can support you, your relationships, and the people who can apprehend reality, and you're divvied off and partitioned out into this little enclosure of people who are cut off from reality, but who are wholly dedicated with every fibre of their being to implementing this false understanding of reality, but trying to make it happen. Recall Marx's denying gravity so as to walk on water. This is the thing, the stuff of fantasy. But if you're going to try and make it happen, such as proving the truth and the reality and the power and this worldliness of his thinking and practice, you're going to have to try and implement it to overcome gravity and to walk on water. So it's not a surprise that Marx then says the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. So philosophy, everything antecedent to Marx was either false, steeped in error. So with that single stroke of the pen, Marx wipes out all philosophy and theological reasoning which has taken place before him. So that's the humility of the man. Secondly, the point is to change it. So he now is the first person who has truly come to realize the nature of existence, human nature, the real connection between humanity and nature, the species and being. He's got the correct pathway, the form of reason, all the knowledge, the morals, the actions. He's got the correct apprehension of the moral sphere in terms of material action and social relations, and how society arises from this base. So you have the base of the economic and material relations reflected up into consciousness, likewise reflected up into the institutions, the government, the prevailing system of philosophy called ideology, which sustains the apparent conflict between the classes and the class antagonism. Okay, so of course, if you're going to try and change the world, it's very useful if you split those people out into different groups, educate them that they're at war and get them to destroy one another. But of course, you're going to need to work incredibly hard if you're going to reform the entire conception of reality that a person possesses. But that's baked into the system already, as we've seen. So when communist workmen associate with one another, theory, propaganda, etc. is their first end. So like I was saying in the last video, once you're in the Marxist system, you're just a means to an end. The ideas that you are given, the tasks that you're given, these are likewise just a means to an end, because really it's to get you to take part in the revolution, to get you to break up your relationships with the family, the society, the people around you, and that you, as this amorphous, socially contract generated collective, overturn, reject society, take part in the revolution, destroy the people who don't take part in the revolution or who resist it, even though you're the aggressors, and then put that into and then that's your new order. But as part of this, so you'll recall from the Communist Confession of Faith that one of the tasks of the people is to bring the enlightenment of consciousness to others. So that's the missionary work. And then secondly, the arguments and ideas and methodology themselves are beyond refutation. So they're taken as accepted. They are this higher truth which is beyond challenge. And then the propagandizing, the theory, that is part of communicating the absolute truth more widely. So of course, if someone doesn't accept that truth once hearing it, then that was their opportunity to come to realization, have the revelation, to self-baptize, to then come into the collective, to be, through social contract, to be accepted, to confess their sin of having partaken in the old prior system in which there was different division, like there was division of labor. Division of labor was associated with accumulating private property at differential rates. But the whole reason that people bought into that system was due to the problem of fetishism. Fetishism being that the form of logic separates you from people and objects around you. And once having separated the object from yourself, the people who are in the know, who've got special Gnostic insight into the old system, use this separation as a lever to manipulate other people into also wanting private property, but the game is already therein rigged. So when they're actually getting other people to opt into the system of private property and the division of labor, it's all a trick in order to bring the person into a vulnerable position whereby the material that they think that they own, in fact, owns them. And the reason the material can own them is because in reality, it is the unity of species and being that's been hidden. So it's actually a single entity, but they think it's something separate from them. And this is how you can actually have an external object own a person. So it's not just simple rhetoric here. There's actually quite a sophisticated system underneath it. And of course, if you've got something which is so established and severe enough to have enslaved all of humanity to then facilitate this process of human sacrifice through the system of labor, then you're going to need to work super hard to overturn it, because as we know, if you've got propaganda, you also require censorship, and Marx's entire model is based on negating an existing structure. So in some of my other videos on I think it was in the queer theory series, and also at the start of the environmentalism series. I think video 1 in the environmentalism is probably a better, because I use more pictorial representations. I use this image of a wagon wheel to represent how you've essentially got the subject as the hub, and you reflect out ideas, you reflect the material relations. Those are the fellows that are at the ends of the spokes on a wheel, but then you've got a banded connection between them all, so it's all internally self-reflecting. Go back and look at the picture, it'll be clear. And you've got this entire framework, so a wagon wheel is a solid structure. It performs a function and it goes places. But if you're in the Marxist, you're saying, well, all of that wagon wheel as it is only a reflection of what it ought to be. So we need to destroy the old one, we need to negate it, and then build a different kind of wagon wheel emanating from people's consciousness. I hope that's kind of clear, but the idea is that you negate whatever has passed and whatever has occurred, and then in the process you come to this intermediary revolutionary period. That's where all the destruction and chaos takes place, but then you're supposed to step forward from that period of destruction and chaos into a new order, and in this new order you can posit all of the new forms of morality, human nature, what it is to be part of the collective, the new form of government, new economics, blah, 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 all that stuff. Okay, so ultimately, because this isn't intuitive to people, because it has to deceive people to falsely apprehend the world and the knowledge through which they understand the world, thereby manipulating their moral decision making, making them more susceptible to emotion through really inflaming the passions and rejecting the form of reason. By doing all of these things, you steadily manipulate people into the point where they're more willing to take part and more capable of taking part in the revolution. And of course, once you've already accused people of having done this to you, you're now situated in a place of saying, well, I'm defending myself and I'm fully justified in using whatever it is because these people are doing something so cruel to me and they're not even realizing it. So that's why material force must be overthrown. By material force, not only must you act and physically overturn the people who refuse to join the movement, not only must you physically overcome them, but there is an existing momentum or impulse behind this, the way that reality is at the moment, as it presently is. So you've got this movement which is kind of dialectically spiraling by itself, and the goal is for the proletariat to take control of this consciously, and having taken control of this consciously, parse out all of the different ideas that are required, all of the different aspects that need to be reformed, put that into practice, destroy the old society, and then posit and establish new material relations afterwards. So if there's an existing material force that's kind of moving along as the form of reality, it needs to be overthrown, and thereby new material relations can be established. These are likewise reflected into people's consciousness, into the institutions, into the prevailing form of philosophy and consciousness. And of course, this dialectical movement continues, so you can have it in one nation, but then you have it in other nations, and then steadily each dialectical revolution needs to reduce the number of contradictions that exist within being. And so you've obviously got to steadily do away with borders, because you can't have individual nation states. You need to have people with common consciousness, and being in different nations is one of those contradictions. Of course, if everybody was living in a singular world state and then somebody like Stalin or Mao came to power, then the death toll that communism and Marxism can realize would number in the billions. And that's one of the important things, is once this philosophy moves out and is applied into different areas, then you can understand that the death toll that Marxism can actually claim is actually nowhere near what it's capable of. So ultimately, once you've got the Gnostic understanding, you reject the fourth commandment. The reason you reject the fourth commandment is you've got to work harder than all the false gods and the false ideas and the people who've come up with the system of slavery in order to overturn the system of slavery. Ironically, the Marxists always see things from the backwards, so they're working 7 days a week to implement slavery, human sacrifice, and so on and so forth. Human sacrifice in order to constitute the pantheist deity, the species being, which is at the end of their system, because you can only get to that entity once you go through the blood gate, which is the sacrifice of the bourgeoisie and the proletariat by the proletariat. So these are the works cited. And again, hope you've enjoyed it.